the book is an outcome of my PhD thesis, which I pursued, a project that I pursued at King's College London, at the India Institute, and the questions were relatively simple, and therefore, in one way or the other, a ripe field to engage with also. So the question started something like this. I mean, how do social movements or socio-cultural movements transform or transition into electorally viable party politics? Um, One of the newest experiments in India in the recent times, let's say, is the Aam Aadmi Party movement, which is out of Aam Aadmi Party, out of the India Against Corruption movement. But my book talks about something that is at least 75 years old now, which is the DMK and the Dravidian movement. Although the movement in itself, on a broad sense, is much older than that. So I look at the DMK as a vehicle to understand this transition of what I call the Dravidian Tamil ethos, how they were disseminated, and how the movement became electorally viable. To begin, the first data point to start with is, I mean, India has high growth, high development examples in rarity. So there are low growth, high development states like, let's say, Kerala or Himachal Pradesh. There are high growth, low development states, let's say, like Gujarat. And there are low growth, low development states like UP and Bihar. But a longitudinal analysis of data will tell us that UP, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu have been at the same point in the 60s. But in the 2025, based on 2025 data, you look at Tamil Nadu being a high growth and a high development state, which is second to Kerala in development and second to Maharashtra in growth. That being the one of the points which warrant for an extended understanding of what shapes policy making in Tamil Nadu. So, another question that also comes in on the comparative note is with, let's say, a state like Goa, which had its first chief minister as an outcome of the Bahujan movement. So Dayanand Bandodkar was a chief minister that came out of the Bahujan movement in Goa. But his party, the MGP, and I have some experience in with consulting for a political party in Goa. In 2022, what we saw was the party was reduced to just 1 or 2 MLAs, and completely lost in its ideological core, in its electoral vote, in its electoral base, and all of that. And it became essentially a party run by two brothers. So all of this being the case, I would like to also sort of touch upon in not just the movement, but the people that led the movement. An interesting question that Selig Harrison poses in the context of Andhra Pradesh and Andhra communists is that they were essentially more commas than communists in the sense that it was a movement led by very elitist people, and therefore in the 1980s, when Telugu Desam Party as an alternative emerged, you could see a big shift. And growing up in Andhra Pradesh, I also saw how the Congress vote share immediately shifted once Jagan broke away, thereby taking electoral politics, or the pivot of electoral politics, behind people, families, or communities as against ideas or identities, for instance. The central argument of the book is this: if you're able to build a sufficiently capacious political identity, which is able to take care of 3 things: recognition of particularistic grievances of multiple communities, which assumes that India will continue to be plural and we don't have to make it uniform. and representation in power and redistribution of opportunities and resources. And I draw this triad from one of the most compelling scholars of our times, which is Nancy Fraser, who talks about recognition, redistribution, representation. If you're able to take care of these three elements vis-a-vis marginalized caste groups or class or gender, all sorts of marginalities, if you're able to do this, then this process, will lead to substantive change, and it moves beyond tokenism. And at the same time, it can serve as a bulwark against any majoritarian tendency, um, be it cultural, be it economic, be it social, be it political. So, how did this come about? And this is my only nerdy slide, so I hope you'll be able to excuse me for that. So I rely on the framework proposed by Professor Christoph Jafferlo, also my supervisor, which is the integrated theory on ethnic nationalism. So it goes on in three stages. One is, are you able to make an identity based out of ideas and ideologies, which is you make an ideology based identity, and are you able to stigmatize another? I mean, and Sri Krishna in his book also teases this out a lot more. The idea of boundary making. Are you able to sort of draw a broad boundary, which is, in other words, centripetal vis-a-vis the people that you want to bring in? And are you able to reduce the number of people, or are you able to make the other an idea or an ideology? For instance, and Tamil Nadu's success is in moving away from anti-Brahmin, for instance, to anti-Brahminism. And that could be, anti-Aryanism, or it could tomorrow transmogrify into something else as well. So the oppression of the day is your problem, and the idea of the day is the dominant idea of the day is your problem. And the transition of this ideas and ideology-based political identity through an educated intelligentsia from marginalized groups. Are you able to do that? So how are you? What is the sophistication in transmitting this identity, or disseminating this identity based off of ideologies? So I discussed the reading rooms in that context, although a lot of existing scholarship talks about movies, but a lot of movies were being made at the time. And movies are a one-way street. And based off of today's social media engagement, we would know, or a lot of you would be knowing, that YouTube and Instagram are a lot more engaging places because of, or a lot more popular places because of the engagement that they allow. So on that notion, padippakams were a place where it was two-way, four-way, five-way, or even a 10-way conversation that was possible. And then once you have disseminated your ethos, your identity, and all of that, how the outcome is you're able to build a vocabulary through which, or a repertoire through which you're able to render the issues of the day. For instance, in the 1960s, price rise was a problem across the country. Plan holiday was there across the country, 1966 to 69. But then the way it was rendered in Tamil Nadu, or Madras state at the time, tells us a lot about and how political parties responded to price rise in Tamil Nadu, including the Congress. For instance, the Congress party had a separate manifesto for Madras state, which is very unlike the Congress in the 1960s. So it had a national manifesto, which was separate, and then a separate Madras manifesto, which was, in other words, a response to what the DMK-led alliance was doing to them. So that's the massification, or agitational part. But the agitational part, again, is rooted only in socio-educational and economic empowerment of the marginalized communities of the society. And this is where I will also talk to you about the anti-Hindi imposition agitation, for instance. I will not take a lot of time. I mean, there are two data sets here. One data set was to understand who were the winners that emerged out of this movement, and what social backgrounds did they come from. For instance, the Raja of Ramnad was defeated by a horse cart puller in his own kingdom. A student leader who did not have any support from either Annadurai, Karunanidhi, or MGR won against Kamraj. So there are many such examples at that time. So how did this come about? And the second data set is to is was basically trying to arrive at an estimate of the number of reading rooms that existed in the state at the time. And one after one of the afterlives of the reading rooms is that Tamil Nadu has around 4,500 plus public libraries in the state today. Um, so there are three strands in which the identity gets made. One is, of course, and it starts from the word Dravidian itself emerging from philologists and linguists like, let's say, Francis Pesky, G.U. Pope, Caldwell, and all of them. But the political transition of the identity happens, and also as an administrative category in the census, happens under Ayodhyadas, one of the foremost icons of the Dravidian movement, because he categorizes Dravidian as a census category and asks the Dalits at the time to report themselves as Dravidians in census. And he also ran newspapers at the time, which I will show you in a bit. And the second strand came from Western Enlightenment. And Ayodhyadas followed a Buddhist retelling of, the Tamil past. That was the framework, and and then the Western Enlightenment, pushed a group of people called who formed the Madras Secular Society, and they were talking against superstition and religious dogma of the day. And and also the third strand come from the Tamil Shaivites who were protesting against a Vaishnavite imposition and a Sanskrit imposition. So Tamil Shaivite versus Sanskrit Vaishnavites, for instance, that could be one of the easily understood binary. But synthesizing all this, Periyar comes with self-respect movement, and at the core of the identity, or identity building, existed the notion that India has a very sophisticated discriminatory system, as described by Ambedkar, which is there's no castes in India. There's no caste in India. There are only castes, and it's a graded inequality system. So it is a self-sustainable and very dynamic system of discrimination, and also which moderates aspirations of people and subjugates themselves. So the counter to this also needed to be very simple and at the same time profound, which was the notion of respect. Because you are denied respect, and therefore you will only fight for respect. And whose respect? Self-respect. And therefore the notion of sovereign comes from the very idea of self itself. So self is sovereign for Periyar. But again, unlike the scholars of the time, or unlike, let's say, Ambedkar, who's a meticulous structuralist, or even a utilitarian, as one may argue, Periyar was a pragmatist. He was in the business not of theory making, but of persuasion. And while Ambedkar was able to define two extremes of the caste order in India, Periyar was engaged in the bottom two portions, which is, as we may know today, from leaders like Kanshi Ram, or even Jyotiba Phule for that matter, the Dalit and the Bahujan. So he was talking to the lower castes and the untouchables, which is where the violence is the most and competition for resources is the highest. And and because of being in the politics of, in the business of persuasion as against theory building, Periyar came off as very candid on a good day and very crass on a bad day. And while his politics was anti-Brahminical or anti-Aryan at that time, he came off as anti-Brahmin. And Annadurai, and he also converted a political party into a social movement, one of the very few instances in India or even in the world where a political party becomes a social movement back, which is the Justice Party was leadership was given to him in the late 30s, and in 44 he makes it the Dravidar Kalagam. And a section of his lieutenants sort of move away in 49 and form the DMK. And Anna's biggest refinement was to understand that if the fight is against a group, then the fight ends at some point. So, but if a fight is against an idea, then it can be a journey. Then it's a destination-less journey unless there is until there is a total change, or unless there is a commonsensical change amongst people. So, and then in his weekly epistle called, he wrote an article called Aryam Irukumidam, or Where Does Aryanism Exist? And he literally lays out Ambedkar's graded inequality in the context of Tamil caste order. While both this sort of created, while both Periyar's conceptualization based on whatever was existing, and also his own addition, and Anna's refinement, there is still unfinished business, which is Tamil Nadu is anti-caste and anti-casteist in public sphere, or in public spaces, or in political spaces. But personal sphere, it needs one or two more reiterations, is my contention. And gender is a question that needs to be addressed in more ways than it has been so far. And while steps are being taken now, that is a place where it needs to sort of come off a lot more in terms of outcomes, as just against processes. So reading rooms were essentially it could be anything, and these are not like addas of Bengal. These were not standalone. Not all of them were standalone. They could be, because all these reading rooms were run by lower caste or lower class people. Therefore, there would generally be multi-purpose places. For instance, I came across the story about a rice mill in Tirupur, which would be a rice mill till about 4 o'clock, 4:30, and then between 4 and 5:30 it would be an evening tuition center for school students, or homework place for school students, and from 5 to 6:30 it would be a reading room, and from 6:30 it would become a night school. So for the elders of the village, and people did not read to themselves, as you will see in a minute, that the literacy rates were low. There would be one or two people who would read a newspaper or a pamphlet out loud, and ideas would then be discussed. So this meant that there was enough organizational pluralism, which means you had your own autonomy to support the party. There was cadre autonomy and supporter autonomy, and it also played a role in developing intra-party competition and also inter-party competition. And at the same time, the DMK was able to come up with strategic flexibility, which is they were even willing to give up on long-term goals per se for the larger idea of, for example, Dravida Nadu, or a secession was a claim. But that goal could be given up as long as the federal contract would uphold the notions of empowerment. So that's how they were able to rearticulate, as against changing for immediate, as against sort of keeping your larger ideas intact, but making compromises in the short term. They were even willing to go with a compromise with a larger goal, as long as the everydayness was taken care of, and as long as politics was embedded in the everyday. In other words, I think they took John Maynard Keynes a lot more seriously, because in the long term, everybody's dead and poor people die quicker. So as I had mentioned, these were information hubs, and in fact, one of the an 85-year-old man, he asked me about, he was piqued about my interest, and he said, "Why are you even doing this? How come you're doing this in the UK and things like that?" He said, "My professor is a Frenchman, he's and he sort of suggested that I explore all of this." He said, "Oh yeah, I did not expect a British scholar to do this to you." And I was surprised. And then immediately he followed up with the next line saying, "But even the French invasion of Algeria was bad." And then I said, "Where did you get that from?" He said, "Oh, well, he said, I read even the Crime and Punishment in Tamil." So Marx was translated in Tamil. The coming of print culture meant that, our chief minister is called Stalin. A lot of Tamil teachers are called Lenin and Marx and Roosevelt and Voltaire. And Periyar wanted to name people Moscow and Volga, isn't it? And because he said, if Palani can be a name, why not Moscow? And things like that. And also a set of caste agnostic names came about from even the Sangam era. For example, Kotravai is a name for a girl child. Kanimoli is a name for a girl child, which come from the Tamil tradition. So there was a Western Enlightenment tradition. There was there was a communist tradition from Russia. And then there was even, Tamil Sangam age tradition where namings changed. And then fathers' names were given. And a host of school teachers in Tamil Nadu led this change from the forefront, who were also at the forefront of the anti-Hindi agitation protest, because it's simple math. In 1950s, Kamraj and the DK people helped set up schools after the resignation of Rajaji. And by 67, all these kids want government jobs. And the government says, well, you learn Tamil and English, doesn't work. You need to learn Hindi. So therefore, it was a movement that was led by students and youngsters. And it featured self-immolations, not burning others. So it was not violent towards the other, but towards the self, because that's the, that's where that's where the vulnerabilities of a movement of the subalterns sort of shows out, which is you don't have the ability to challenge the dominant, but at the same time the only way that you can make a spectacle out of an event is by burning yourself. So is this exceptional? No, I'm not here to sell you Tamil Nadu is great again story at all. This existed in global south. Brazil had, if you were to go to Paulo Freire's work, literacy circles in Brazil. West Africa had griots, and I was in Indonesia for, a couple of times in the last 2 years for field work, and dalangs would do puppeteering and sort of, keep up this kind of political culture. And who came? Non-Brahmin lower caste, Dalits and workers, small traders and students, semi-literate community members. And there was no membership fee, there was no membership cards. So, and this is one of the lines that, kept, which stayed with me, which told by an 85, 90-year-old man. He said, and he said it in Tamil much better, but the English translation of it is, to read together was to live the principle of self-respect, because you couldn't, in that day, you couldn't come together into the same room if you belong to multiple caste groups. And he said to debate in Tamil was to challenge cultural hierarchies. And this was not just political, this is also, this is not just political in the sense of political parties, but for instance, two people who would go on to become great leaders in the Communist Party and the DMK, and one of them actually gave me an interview, said that, the Madurai Adinam, or the saint of the Madurai Shaivite monastery, said that, and had a Shivratri gathering. And the Shivratri gathering essentially would look at devotees. But there was a debate contest that he presided over. And in Tamil, it's called Pattimandram. So the debate contest's, topic of discussion was, what is better for Madras, Marxism or Dravidianism? And two people would debate all night. And then two people would again go on to become great leaders in their own parties. So this is essentially a cross-party or a cross-section of people who came in and engaged in such activity. So a few newspapers from then, a conservative estimate says anywhere between one issue or even continuing to survive today, there were at least 300 to 400 in the 1960s. So the Thinker was started by Madras Secular Society, for instance, and the Tamil version of it is called Tattva Veshini. The top row, second and third, is called Oru Paisa Tamilan and Tamilan. These were started by Ayodhidas. And the fourth on the first row is called Porwal or Battle Sword, run by or edited. The editor was Satyavani Muthu, one of the first Dalit ministers of the Dravidian movement, and who was in the DMK, then moved to the ADMK, came back to the DMK, and then passed away. And then Homeland, run by Anna, and then Inamulakkam. Inamulakkam is Cry of the Race. Kanji is again a place where Annadurai was born. And Kudiyarasu, run by Periyar, which is Republic, or as Professor Chalapati would say, that Periyar meant democracy. And Murasoli, which continues to exist as the party organ of the DMK, which is Drumbeat, run by Karunanidhi. And Dravida Cinema, Dravida Nadu, and Tennaga Talaivan, meaning leader of the South. And then Vidudalai, which is again run by Periyar. Vidudalai means freedom. So here's an interesting, 3 photos from an MGR song, which is to say how these reading rooms played an important role. So this is a song where he was trying to break away from the DMK. And this song's called Thambi Naan Padithen Kanjile Netru. So these 3 shots are very interesting in the sense that he comes to a village holding up this magazine. The magazine is called Samanidhi, or Equal Justice, run by him. He was the editor. He bought it from C.T. Chidambaram, a member of Legislative Assembly from Karaikudi. And he reads that, He reads the magazine out in public, and then shows it to the children of the village and gives it off to this young adult who's going to run the reading room. In other words, he's going to say from tomorrow onwards, stop reading Murasoli and start reading Samanidi. So, and then he goes away. And here are a couple of correlation maps. So that's the heat map of reading rooms, and how it changes between 57 and 67. And in 67, you will realize that there is a near correlation, and it is also and it's interesting to note that while reading rooms existed in south of Tamil Nadu, those reading rooms in Kanyakumari district, for instance, were run by the Congress as well in a very strong manner, and Kanyakumari and south of Tirunelveli was anyway a challenge for the DMK until the ADMK managed to break it in the late 90s and early 2000s. So the reading rooms continue to exist there, but the broad correlations between the proliferation of reading rooms and victories and electoral victories. So now, while the dissemination is done, how are they able to render issues of the day in their vocabulary? The first constitutional amendment had a pan-India effect, but had a big political rally in Tamil Nadu. For instance, the restoration of reservation system and after the Champagam Rajan case. While it had a pan-India impact, it was picked up in a big way in the Madras state, and there was a cross-party support at the time. The second would be the modified scheme of elementary education, which was brought by Rajaji, which was based off of Varda scheme of Mahatma Gandhi, and today's, let's say, Ekal Vidyalayas of today. So it would be vocational education, promotion of vocational education of students. That again, while it had a pan-India implication, it was a big problem in Tamil Nadu. It was dubbed into caste education scheme or Kula Kalvi Thittam, and a lot of people don't even know MSEE's full form, or even the MSEE as an anagram. And the States Reorganization Act of 1956, while it was the churning started from Andhra Pradesh through Potti Sriramalu, Tamil Nadu took an interesting standpoint, and the Indo-China War and the 16th Amendment. So essentially, the DMK did not give up on the secession claim till the 16th Amendment came in, which was to say that if you have any anti-India or anti-India integrity notions in your party, code book, then you would be, disbarred and things like that. So the Indo-China War, where the communists wanted to challenge the party of or the Congress at that time, the DMK went in support of the Congress and said not at this time, and then also said that we'll give up on Dravida Nadu as long as the federal ethos of the Congress of the Indian Constitution are upheld. And they go back to Acharya J.B. Kriplani, who in 1946 address of the Congress party says that if the states do not have notion of freedom, then or a federal strand, then it is inimical to the notion of liberty itself. So that was the Congress presidential address by J.B. Kriplani in 1946, for instance. And then the anti-Hindi imposition agitation, where the state was put its foot down and said it will be a two-language policy. But the party was very particular that the students don't engage in the protest, because they understood, in other words, I think they read Hobbes more than Locke, and they understood that the state is dominant. And even the Sri Lankan pogrom, which was put down by the Sri Lankan state at that time in the 1950s, was a big lesson to say that there's no way that a violent agitation will give you what you want. So the agitation was used as a bargain chip to get to a table, to work out a solution that's amicable, and then move forward. So it's essentially push, consolidate, and then push further, as against just keep pushing. And then food price rise. I mean, the price rise, so much self-respect arguments being put forth, and then if people are not even able to afford everyday meal, it sort of has a compounded impact. So that also was one of the big reasons why the Congress party lost. So Kamraj, he's a tall figure in the Congress party, and he was trained. He was mentored by one of the most eloquent leaders of the Congress party, Satyamurthy. In Tamil Nadu, he's also called Silver Tongue Satyamurthy, because he spoke impeccable English. And in 1930s, so they belonged to the Swarajists group, and they wanted to fight elections. And the Congress Party, once they won the 1937 election in Madras state, the High Command says that Rajaji will preside over as the premier, as against Satyamurthy. So that's where, as a mentee, he's angry for his mentor with Rajaji. So it goes on, and it goes on till about 1950s. Although he's very respectful. Make no mistake. There's a certain political antagonism, but respect continued to prevail because Rajaji is a towering personality in the larger subcontinent, not just India for that matter. So, but once Rajaji moves away in 1954 after the Kulakalvi Tittam, and I'd want to sort of talk about what Rajmohan Gandhi himself says, that all that Rajaji needed to have to do was to say no to that scheme, and he could have, but he did not, which cost him, a huge, unpopularity. And once Rajaji left the Congress party, Kamraj took over, and in the 1957 election, at least 50 DK people are fighting, elections in Congress tickets, which also creates a churn within the Congress elites at that time. In one of the interviews to the Caravan magazine, it is said that there is a lot of Congress in the RSS and a lot of RSS in the Congress. So that element, so there was a certain de-Brahmanization and or a Dravidianization of the Congress that happened in the 50s, which is through these, let's say, and the midday meal scheme. The civil servant N.D. Sundaravadivelu, who was the architect alongside Kamaraj, was also from was a very big follower and a self-claimed follower of Periyar, and worked in the DK as well. So, but while he was very strong, and Kamaraj had the support of Periyar, because Periyar saw Kamaraj as a stable machine, as against a machine which could deliver outcomes, as against the DMK, which was a fledgling organization by a bunch of youngsters. Because if you take Annadurai out of scene, the mean age of people in the DMK who won the elections is hardly 31, 32 years old. So there was experience, but then the K plan pushed Kamaraj out, by his own volition, while Periyar urged him not to go. And Bhaktavatsalam could not hold the fort. He could not speak to the people the way Kamaraj could. He was not accessible the way Kamaraj was. And, and the role of teachers. So there is an interesting comment, which also I mentioned in the book, saying that a senior leader of the Congress party said, here's a man who made lives of teachers formal and respectable, and they ended up being, party functionaries of the DMK. So, because the anti-Hindi agitation, or even the name changing and etc. of student, or the naming of even children, and the support to the DMK came from the reading rooms network, but also school teachers. There was overlap between the reading room networks and the school teachers of the time. So, but there's an interesting question: why did then Annadurai, Karunanidhi, or MGR not support Srinivasan, the guy who was contesting against Kamaraj? Because former secretary of the DMK, younger brother, told me in an interview that they saw Kamaraj as a bridge between Congress ethos and the Dravidian ethos, and they said if the bridge is not strong enough, then the transition will not be legitimate. So therefore, Kamaraj is more a Dravidian icon today than the Congress would even want or would even prefer. Srinivasan, grassroots organizing. It was essentially a bunch of 300 to 400 college students. He was arrested in the Defense of India rules of 1965 during the anti-Hindi agitation. And it was essentially just door-to-door campaigns. And he also campaigned against the 17th Amendment of Indian Constitution, which allowed for the government to take over Rayatwari lands, which existed a lot in Tamil Nadu, unlike, let's say, UP or Bihar, which is largely zamindari. There was Rayatwari in Tamil Nadu, so in Madras state. So, and also he wins the election in the same constituency in 71 as well. But at the same time, the DMK was very particular to note and not visibly reward him after the election. When he goes and asks for a cabinet seat, they say no, not at this cost. So that was one of the interesting questions. Those interesting points that came about. what did the results signify? Representationally, there was a deepening of democracy, underrepresented communities, and even today, as of 2021 election, based on the TCPD data, which I also played a role in building in Ashoka University at the time, Tamil Nadu gives out, or Tamil Nadu's legislative assembly has 34 caste groups, one of the most diverse assemblies in India. And now the women representation continues to be low. And even at that time, it was very low. Now it's around 5%. And cabinets were, were quite representative, but were not substantively representative. There were all sorts of people there, but in terms of the amount of control that they had over government resources, if you were to do that kind of an analysis, there was a disproportionality, and there was a conspicuous dip in the member of legislative assemblies, MLAs, without caste names. So caste names were, given up and this comes from the 1944 resolution of the Dravidian Kalagam or the Justice Party at that time, which to say that you have to give up on your titles. Or, for example, I'm Vignesh Rajahmani, as against anything else. So I would want to sort of end with this line saying, the Dravidian movement started off, let's say, with the non-Brahmin manifesto, which meant at that time Dravidian would have been synonymous with non-Brahmin, but now it is not just non-Brahmin elites, but non-Brahmin backward castes, non-Brahmin most backward castes, non-Brahmin lower Dalits, and also LGBTQIA communities. For instance, pride marches in Tamil Nadu. There are 2 pride marches, one by upper class people, which is rainbow flag alone, but the others by lower class people, which has Periyar and Ambedkar in their flags, and also a blue and a red streak on their flags. And the same-sex couple case in the Madras High Court that also gave rise to very interesting Madras High Court judgment was actually the petitioners were from very normal working class families, as against coming from the top. So the larger argument is, all of this is not magic, it's essentially political labor. The movement in my next book, which I would be talking about, where I would be talking about Dravidian movement in the 90s. So they also faltered, but they got back up. But the one thing that was common is the notion of considering inequalities to be dynamic and resilient, and therefore the solutions or approaches to fight them also to be dynamic and resilient. So it is persistence and patience over large scale revolutions, but at the same time not giving up on the radicalness in terms of ideas, but having the patience to be able to understand that these will be a longer journey. So in other words, it's a test match over T20, which is what people in Lords would love, but people in Tamil Nadu also love a test match over T20 game, is my understanding. Thanks.
Thanks, Vignesh. So while my name is Sri Krishna Iyengar, I'm not Tamil in the sense. I'm probably Dravidian in the sense that my mother's from Tamil Nadu, father's from Andhra. I was born in Bangalore, and I'm always confused where I'm. And I think it's from there, like an outsider who's looking inside history. So I'm coming from that perspective. I'm not a specialist in Dravidian politics, but I've read about Tamil Nadu, for some time. And so your book brought back a lot of memories and many instances. So I'll just spend around 5 to 10 minutes talking about some things about this book and some questions. So this is a story of Dravidian movement starting, I would say, from the 1960s, all the way to today. And I think this is a story that is not completely told if you look at the history of this movement. And we don't really appreciate the story because apart from the fact that it's a very ethnically pluralist, inclusive movement, probably one of the few movements that is multi-generational. It's had 4 leaders who have literally seen each other, and they have infinitely adapted this story, for a long period of time. It's only grown and become more resilient and become more adaptable. And even Vignesh should be a story that and I think a part of that story. It's a story, of course, as Vignesh said today. I know it's a story of Tamil Nadu today is high growth, high development, also high levels of representation. But what struck me, I've been thinking about what's the story really telling me, and I feel that the story this is really telling me is how do you really build a democracy. And I think in the context of Instagram and AI downstairs, Facebooks and consultants and all that noise, the salient thing about the story is you build a democracy through reading, writing, speaking, listening. It's only through dialogue that this democracy is built from year upon year. Like he calls it political labor, but this is the political labor. And this is the only story, the biggest story that I take away from this place, because it's in this process of reading, writing, communicating, and dialoguing. We learn a lot about ourselves, but we also learn about others. And what Ambedkar would call, we learn to reconstruct ourselves in some sense. And I think that's the story of Dravidianism that no other social movement seems to have. Right? And in this, there are many people who have written about Dravidian politics. Vignesh is the latest entrant in the scholarship around Dravidian politics. There are a pantheon of intellectuals from Margaret Ross Barnett to Narendra Subramaniam, M.S.S. Pandian, and Vignesh in his first few chapters actually negotiates his way around this. So he's unlike a traditional thing which lumps all the readings together and says, okay, this is my point of view. He's actually engaging each author, each of their works, and trying to find his space and trying to find his voice, and makes it very explicit. So in the first part, if you're a person who's not familiar with Dravidian politics, you'll actually get a whole sense of what the conversations are around, right? And how do people, for example, understand Periyar, and how does he understand Periyar? So in that sense, he's just starting his debut, sort of batting into this larger group of scholars. He also follows a particular form of research that I am not. I don't follow that, and it's very strong. And when he told me that he was Chris Jaffrelow's student, the imprint is very very strong, which is a very rich empirical narrative. There are sort of many minute dots, and in fact, the story. His book achieves this crescendo from 1949 to 1967, where almost he covers in minute, minuscule detail, year by year, what's going on in Tamil Nadu politics, the debates, who said what, when, to whom, why, and it's a sort of political thriller in many ways, but in a very rich sort of graphic detail. So that's the second part. It's a very rich empirical narrative for a person who wants to learn more about Tamil Nadu politics. It's probably a good book to read. The third part of his book, I think, is about the padipakkams, the reading rooms, and where he spends. It's very fascinating. It's almost like you can call it an ethnographic study of sorts, though he's not interpreting it. He's actually just collecting. Here's a man who goes, interviews, octogenarians, nonagenarians, talks to them, gets quotes from them, views these reading rooms. There are different kinds of reading rooms, different party reading rooms owned by different people, and so on. And I think it's for a person who wants to understand Tamil Nadu politics. This has been flagged in scholarship earlier, but not to the detail that Vignesh points out to. Last, of course, he of course while his book deals with the dramatic incident of Kamaraj's defeat in 1967, and he spends a considerable amount of time on Annadurai before that, and then the Kamaraj election. And then his last chapter is about essentially Dravidian politics post 2016. But essentially, around that, after Karunanidhi's death, where does it stand? And he describes Tamil Nadu politics, in relation to other things, in relation to Dalits, in relation to non-Brahmins, in relation to Muslims, in relation to the BJP, and so on. And sort of he wraps up this whole story in that. And he just told us that his next book is in the 1990s, so I'm sure we'll look at that. So that chapter is also sort of useful to get a sense of where does Dravidian politics stand now. So now having sort of surveyed this, I had a couple of questions. I have two questions essentially, and then one provocation. The first question I have is, I mean, you've covered till 1967, but after 1967, Mr. Karunanidhi is, I mean, he's the man. He's probably the oldest political leader. He's been around in politics since the 1930s, dies in 2016. He spent multiple generations. And so I understand the salience of Periyar and Periyar and Annadure. But I'm wondering how, for me, if I were to look at it, this is a man who spent the largest amount of time leading the DMK. His family has also continues to play MK Stalin after his son. I'm wondering why you don't consider him, maybe you consider him in the next book. But I'm just curious, what is your view about, do you think he is in fact one of the more taller leaders, though he's of course written in his early years, but this is the man who actually, it's not so much who founded it, but who led the party for a long period of time. So for me, Karunanidhi would come across as the tallest. I wonder how you respond to that. And the second question is, I mean, most countries around the world, they find it very difficult to manage, democratic deepening and market reforms or redistribution. And in Tamil Nadu, at least the conventional view is that they throw a lot of money on freebies and so on. So what's the story behind the Dravidianism that manages to pull off these two, where you throw freebies, increase representation, and you still maintain high growth and high development? So that's a question that I had for you. And the last question I have is not a question, but it's more a provocation, which is, I mean, if Tamil Nadu's story, and I'm talking not in terms of it's inclusive or exclusive, because I don't want to get into that debate about inclusive and exclusive, but it's a question of, let's call it ethnic pride. Okay? I'm looking at it as an outsider. So I'm looking at Dravidianism I have no background. I'm reading this and I'm saying this is a story of ethnic pride. And its ethnic pride is showing up in a sort of inclusive way. Well, what's going on in the country is also ethnic pride. Right? So what's the difference between, why is it okay in Tamil Nadu but not okay in India? I don't get it. And I have this confusion because there are some things that we say at the national which are not correct. But there are lots of contradicting things that happen in the regional which you're totally fine with. And I'm wondering, and this seems to be a question of that sort, which is, I understand there are qualitative content-based differences, but the story is fundamentally about building your ethnic pride from the middle, let's assume. Right? So why, if it's okay for Tamil Nadu, why can't it be okay for India? And I'm curious how you would respond. So that's my last provocation. All right, thank you.
Congratulations, Vignesh, for this wonderful book. And I'm glad it'll be easily available in the market because Context has brought it out and Hearst has brought it out in the UK and India. So it's definitely a book that the public will be very interested in. It's accessibly written and it presents fascinating empirical material. Not being a Tamil studies person, but having been exposed to Tamil studies anthropological scholarship for more than a decade, I was reminded of some of my teachers, especially Barnard Bate, who wrote a wonderful, wonderful book called Tamil Oratory and the Dravidian Aesthetic, and also Frank Cody's work, who you cite, on tea rooms and newspaper reading and largeness, a certain kind of largeness of the world being orchestrated through these newspaper reading events and such. So I'm going to skip over a lot of the the macro empirical material that you present, which is fascinating to me, but I'm unable to comment on it with expertise. But there's certain kinds of things which come out in the book, which are the ethnographic studies, especially the padippakkam. Sorry. And the reading room culture, the cultures of conversation, the cultures of habitation of a public self. These are of great interest to me. And so I'm going to divide my comments in three ways. Language and public sphere, which is central to the building blocks of that Vignesh has put together in this book, the kind of the very Lego of the book, is, I think, the element of public sphere, and the Lego of the Lego is language, which then becomes, to my response to Sri Krishna's last question, would be language is not religion. So linguistic pride has a inroad into a certain form of modernity that religion, at least in South Asia, gets much more complicated. Two, I'm going to make some comments on the question of the ethos. And you've made, Jignesh, a comment, a provocation on the Dravidian ethos. What is ethos, and how does society and politics, how do society and politics interact in the making and breaking of an ethos? How does public and private interact in the in this kind of ethos making process? That's my second point. And my third point is, a lot of this discussion. I'm an anthropologist who's very interested in the making of selves, which are individual. Doesn't mean I'm deeply individualistic, but the unit of the individual becomes a kind of a placeholder, a carrier for various kinds of group, collective, large scale stuff, material, political, social, ethnic, linguistic, religious, whatever, and caste. But the individual is a unit of measurement or a unit of analysis. And so, my last point is about, I see implicit in this book an argument or a potential, something that Jignesh might press forth in his second work, about the nature of the Dravidian self. There is a self here that is able to and wants to inhabit a public form, and why and how that is. Let me get back to my first point. In the early 2000s, the kind of guru of public sphere scholarship, as we know, is a German scholar by the name Jürgen Habermas, who then gets taken up and revised in feminist scholarship, in global scout scholarship, in queer scholarship, and in India, especially the linguistic public kind of scholarship. And kind of Habermas's earlier kind of bourgeois public sphere thesis gets taken up by various kinds of scholars and made sense of in the context of various other kinds of public formations. In the 2000s, early 2000s, a queer studies philosopher, and a philosopher who's interested deeply in queer studies, Michael Warner, came up with the idea of counter publics. And Jignesh's work for me is showing a very deep understanding of a let me say, jugalbandi between publics and counter publics. Publics are dominant formations. Publics have a public can be anything between a huge procession going in the middle of the city to a massive crowd gathering to watch Lionel Messi for 15 minutes, and something like that. That's the power of a common contemplation of a target, focal point by a large number of people who are watching the same thing, reading the same thing, thinking the same thing at a given point in time. A counterpublic emerges as a splinter entity. And between the splinter and the main, the big, strong, and the somewhat weak and precarious, there is a interesting, powerful tension. There's a resistant tension, but there's also an attractive tension. And the counterpublic is constantly also attracted by the powerful magnetism of the public. And in to me, especially this bridge argument, the Dravid Congress and Dravidian bridge, is there's an interesting argument latent there about the power of counter publics in a country like India, which can be subsumed in a massive, potent, majoritarian, dominant public, or which can bring out the dominant, the elements of the margins of those dominant publics, and vacuum clean them into a different kind of public, which I will provisionally call a counter public, in the way that Michael Warner would have us know. So, what is the power of this kind of counter way of imagining an Indian ethos, a South Indian ethos, and a Tamil ethos? And that makes me segue into my comments about ethos. It's a very interesting choice of theoretical move that Jignesh has made, and the kind of argument Jignesh wants to make through it. And ethos is not easy. It's tangible and intangible. On the path, the newspaper clippings that he showed, the posters, the photos, there's a tangible trace of an ethos, but the ethos is not collected on the screen of the BIC library. There's no ethos on the photos that were on the slide. The ethos is not there. The ethos is animated if all of us here in this room were speaking Tamil, or engaging with Tamil conversation, which these newspaper clippings were animating. So they're placeholders, they're traces, which are only kind of, they're dead switches. They're switched on only when a public comes into play in that reading room in a night school or a factory, where a large number of people are coming together and reading something out loud, which is also an example that Frank Cody uses in some of his early work before even Light of Knowledge was published, which is about literacy activists who write petitions and read out newspapers to a kind of a village public who don't often read very easily but want things to be read out. In very typical Habermasian terms, this is a critical rational debate. Habermas had talked about the bourgeois salon in the 18th and the 19th century Europe, where there were these like salon type spaces, cafes, parlors, where people wanted to engage with each other in quote unquote critical rational debate. And that criticality and that rationality is then being imbibed in Tamil terms, which is to me absolutely fascinating. And that is the ethos. The ethos is, for me as an anthropologist interested in the making of the self, I'm not as interested in as to what kind of political interest calculations emerged out of those conversations. That's fascinating for me. But for me, what is more kind of powerful is that how does that ethos emerge? It emerges through conversation, through use of language, through public use of language. It's not private. It is not in your kitchen. It is in the kind of tea room or reading room or courtyard of the factory, or at some kind of chai shack outside the road, and that kind of thing, which is a dying culture in many parts of India. And I'm thinking of Bengal, where even outside of Calcutta, there's a strong, which people often don't know about because kind of Dipesh Chakraborty gets taken up in this kind of dominant manner. But people kind of read newspapers together or talk to each other about the yesterday's football match or whatever else. But they're performing publicness. Why is that publicness important? Because it gives them a sense of largeness. You're no longer kind of narrowed and contained in your kitchen or your kind of a private zone. You're liberated into occupying a larger canvas, which is then the public. The power of the public is here, and the word ethos does great, kind of great justice to that making of the public. What are the ingredients that go into it? It's not only the reading; it's the reading together. It's a reading in close conversation. It's a reading looking at each other's eyes. And it's a reading in Tamil, which I don't see necessarily Tamil as identitarian. I see it as a form of occupying, taking a language and taking it, making it a necessary ingredient of a modern identity. tradition, modernizing what otherwise might be marked off as tradition. And lastly, on the self, the Dravidian self, I mean, bits of it comes from Barnard Bate, but I'm very interested in the kind of person who emerges out of this long-term training in the reading rooms. And it's a kind of social training, it's a kind of political training, which is why they once they're habituated to it, they're able to put in this kind of political labor, that they will translate Rosa Luxemburg into Tamil, or Walter Benjamin into Tamil. And I know these things are done because a former student is a Tamil literary magazine kind of translator, and he tells me that these literary magazines are so alive. And in that way, I'll end with a mention of a book called The Last Soviet Generation. It's by the anthropologist who's of Russia, or the former USSR, Alexei Yurchak, who's saying there's a certain kind of way of going to meetings and protests and political social organizing, so social canvases or social settings of the political, that that the Soviet party worker or political cadre or just a political active person of the Soviet generation occupies. And that to them is very, very precious. Even at the fag end of the Soviet era, where the Yurchak is doing these interviews with the last Soviet generation, people who were 18 or 20 in 1989. That's the generation that he's doing his interviews with, and they're saying that ethos of being able to talk in this slightly highfalutin formal Russian, and talking about big things and governance and bureaucracy and whatever, it gives a certain sense of power to the self. You're not just an interest grabbing, alcohol bottle wanting or $500 wanting voter. You're a public intellectual who has an interest and an evaluation of public matters. And that's where I think there's a commonality or some kind of jugalbandi between the kind of reading room self that Vignesh is describing, and the kind of last Soviet generation Soviet self that Yurchak had described. Thank you and congratulations.
In your opinion, to what extent is the current high economic growth of Tamil Nadu attributable to the Dravidian movement, which, at least on the face of it, was a social justice movement, and had nothing to do with economic development per se?
When you say today's economic growth, you mean from the 60s?
Well, in 2024, Tamil Nadu had the fastest economic growth.
Correct.
In the last, ever since liberalization, Tamil Nadu has just taken off, right?
Okay.
Does ideology continue to be relevant in Tamil Nadu? Do these padippakams still exist today? My understanding is that these padippakams have just become like party offices and public libraries, etc., and not really the kind of interaction that you talked about, right? And once the ideology, if the ideology is not relevant, as I believe it is, that ideology is not relevant anymore. I mean, Brahmins constituted 2 or 3% of Tamil Nadu's demographic at that time, and but Brahmins held all the important positions of power, and therefore going anti-Brahmin, anti-Brahminism, etc., had a sort of relevance. Today, that's no longer the case, and does the ideology hold any place in Tamil politics? And there are multiple caste groups which have many splinter groups have formed. There are so many other political parties which have come up, which are for specific caste groups and so on. And so, I mean, how different is it today from other states?
Hello, my name is Kaushik. I would be curious to know how Dravidianism engages with the Adivasis and the tribals. There is, it is known the good work that they have done for Dalits and the untouchables, but there is also, if you know the context, Ambedkar was also sometimes criticized for not speaking for the Aborigines or the original inhabitants. So I was curious to know how Dravidianism engages with Adivasis, and that's.
Uh, Thank you very much for these questions. In fact, fantastic responses. And Atre, I will surely cite you, but my next presentation will be a lot more fancy than this one. I have a lot of notes from what you've said. And Krishna, thanks for the provocation. I really love it. I'll respond in a bit. But economic growth to Dravidian movement. So, so let's start from the Justice Party itself. So the Non-Brahmin Manifesto. So T.M. Nair, from who the early articulations of federalism come from, which he's also written about in his journal that he ran called Antiseptic, because he was a doctor as well. So from there, let's start. And there's this British civil servant called Alfred Chatterton. So the early Justice Party leaders, or at that time South Indian Liberal Federation, as they were called, they went to Alfred Chatterton and other British civil servants. And this is where the first forking comes, which is between Annie Besant and the Justice Party leaders. Because Annie Besant says Swadeshi, caste, cultural value, capital, etc. And then the Justice Party leaders say no, economic growth, learning of skills. We want to replicate an Ahmedabad mill. We want to replicate a Bombay industrial revolution and things like that. So there was the outcomes, as Eugene Ershik mentions, was very or the expectations were very economically priced, or economic empowerment, or priced on the notions of economic empowerment, for that matter. That being the case, that is then followed up with, let's say, Annadurai, who's also an economist, and his less read work is actually a book called Panathotam, which is Money Farm, where he mentions in great detail about capital accumulation, and he says how capital needs to be disaggregated. If capital is not disaggregated, then development will not be redistributive. This is the argument. And one of the earliest critiques, much before Harish Damodaran and all, who makes very eloquently, Annadurai makes it very politically, and at the same time with a lot of tables at that time against, let's say, capital being accumulated by few caste groups. And the 1950s three-corner protests in the Dravidian movement had one of the train stations renamed as Dalmiapuram. And that was one of the oppositions, saying that you can build your industries here, but that doesn't mean you impose yourselves onto us, because economics or economic development will be a two-way street. And there are iterations on how there needs to be steel plant. There are iterations on how there need to be atomic energy, because he being an economist as well. I mean, and he also proudly claims himself to come from Fabian socialism, that kind of social democracy. And he was trained by N.G. Ranga. He had fieldwork experience, etc. And since then, a lot of this happened with Kamaraj as well. In fact, the reason why the DMK could not criticize Kamaraj is because he was delivering economic development. And their plank of economic development or criticism over economic development did not emerge because of Kamaraj being there. And once Kamaraj moves away, the DMK goes full throttle on the politics of mobilizing against the Congress party. That is one interesting point that I'd want to. And from there, even till date, Tamil Nadu has diversified its industries. One of the less known stories is you take out 2 or 3 industries from a few top performing states in the country, and their economy will have a significant impact. But Tamil Nadu's industries are a lot more broad based and also increasingly diversified. For instance, Tirupur was known for, let's say, textiles and pump sets, but now you have tech coming in western Tamil Nadu. And northern Tamil Nadu, now you see there used to be car manufacturing, but now northern Tamil Nadu has non-leather footwear. The most number of non-leather footwear products are made in Tamil Nadu outside of Taiwan. One of the civil servants told me about this. And so that's the new intervention. And so then women get to work in these places. So therefore you build alternative systems. So in terms of, these freebies are essentially social. So that is the difference between what capital is willing to pay as wage versus what people deserve as wage. So instead, you don't make a claim, or you don't make people suffer over less wage in today's day of downward spiraling race to the bottom theory. Uh, instead, the argument will be that let capital come in, pay how much they can, and we will sort of bridge the gap. And a foundational change for economic development has been that India at the union level prioritized an IIT and an IIM over a primary school, which Myron Weiner calls as elite bias. So Tamil Nadu flipped the elite bias. They invested in schools first, and colleges came much later. And privatization, etc., is a much later phenomenon of the 80s. So that kind of a broad basing now means that a Sridhar Vembu can set up, or a Zoho can set up a BPO in Nagarkoil. A BPO doesn't have to be set up in Chennai. Now Trichy, Madurai, Coimbatore are also over. Now it's Nagarkoil. That kind of a broad basing is happening. So therefore, the economic development, and even today, when there is an interesting temple debate happening in Tamil Nadu, the party is actually having a big, there are 3 big investment meets and 1 women empowerment meet celebration, and the other is job creation celebration. So is Tamil Nadu developing in education is the first question. Is Tamil Nadu developing in job creation is the second question. So WinFast, for example, an EV manufacturer is coming in. So that kind of a push. So without economic empowerment or educational empowerment of the marginalized, the Dravidian movement loses its base. So that's the driving force. And the identity is there only to facilitate this. Much like how religion is created to facilitate people's lives as against the other way. So in this case, Dravidian identity serves as a catalyst for empowerment of people, and empowerment as determined or as discursively described in every time period. So in the 60s, it could be 12th pass. Today, it is doctor, and etc. So that is the. So therefore, to split the Dravidian movement away from the economic development would be untenable, at least in an academic paper. So the other question was, does ideology continue to be relevant? Yes. Every question that's been raised in Tamil Nadu, and in fact, as an interesting point, and Atre also mentioned counter publics, how they emerge, how they are latent switches. And I met one of the book fair organizers in Chennai, and they said suddenly, a lot of Periyar books are being sold. You publish a Periyar book, and because it's all publicly accessible, there's no copyright. So why are women enslaved? Is one book that he wrote. A number of copies being sold. Or Periyar on religion, Aloysius, Critical Quest. A whole bunch of these small books, quick read books, are being sold so quickly in the recent past. And also big books are being published. So without, as much as economic development is important, there's an interesting question, right? I mean, welfare and economic development. Andhra Pradesh delivered both under Jagan Mohan Reddy, but he lost an election. Orissa delivered it under Naveen Patnaik, but he was challenged. Huge welfare doleouts without an ideology. And Aam Aadmi Party 2025 is also an interesting case. See that such big civic offerings, and still without an ideology, you can't hold it together. So it's, and also the criticism comes in Tamil Nadu, how the 2 ways of criticism. One, you already were, you already had a head start, therefore the economic development exists, is one argument. But that's the argument that's said by very, very few people. But most prominent criticisms of the Tamil Nadu model is on the notions of cultural and social preferences and choices, and religious choices as against, and language choices as against economic choices, for instance. So which goes on to say that it's the ideology that paints the dominant ethos that is prevalent at any point in time. It could be from any part of the spectrum. So any dominant ethos will be challenged, and this is where I talk about it as a politics of becoming. If in the context of there's a periphery, there's a lot of churning, it becomes mainstream, and only to allow the next periphery to churn. For instance, in the context of LGBTQIA, Tamil Nadu government gives out a glossary to media houses to say that, LGBTQIA plus should be called with these names only. You can't sort of use your. So that glossary is given in that state. While there are people in the country who say that it's you just take 4 tablets a day and you'll be fine. And those tablets are also popular, I understand. So yeah. And padippakams, they exist as workshops today. The DMK runs the DMK youth wing runs workshops called Dravidian model workshops, engaging, and 200 youngsters have been picked up from first generation political families. I mean, meaning first generation of families without any political backing. Those youngsters are being now trained and they are public speakers. That is done by the youth wing. Women's wing organizes quiz competitions, and the parent body and the parent organization, which is the party, organizes workshops where even tall leaders like, let's say, Trichy Shiva, who brought out a private members bill on transgender rights, or an A Raja, who's pretty eloquent in the parliament, sort of go out and talk to people, face any question, and any question posed by people, be it starting from reservation to HRNC, etc. So those things are happening. And Clubhouse, I raised a lot of my a good chunk of my PhD funding money because of COVID. There were not many funding opportunities left, and I raised my money on Clubhouse. So we would go on a Saturday, talk about ideology. We would talk about the Me Too movement. We talk about a lot of things, and then the Clubhouse places, Twitter spaces, Facebook, Orkut, Quora groups, and I'm the crocodile that survived Orkut as well. So yeah. So right from Orkut to today's Instagram, you have Reels, and the DMK IT wing is pretty savvy with these things. So the IT wing, because of a lot of tech education and things like that, they're very, very savvy. So yes. And again, anti-Brahmin, no, I mean, it stopped being anti-Brahmin long time ago. The DMK's constitution was written by Brahmin, VP Raman. Okay. So and TM Krishna, a very revered person, and in fact, we need also someone to break the pyramid from the above, isn't it? So and if you were to take the Pan-Malayan Dravidian Association in Malaysia, they fought against the Chettiars. So it's not the Brahmins there. So and therefore the idea is, and also today, who is the DMK fighting? The DMK is fighting the BJP, who is led by 2 OBC leaders. So it's essentially, what are you elitist, not are you elite? So if you are elitist, then there's a problem. So if you're an elite, there is no problem. In fact, there's an interesting question that comes up, saying when there are these where there is responses or criticisms that come in, which Professor Ritika Kera said that she was doing her research and she found some problems with the way entries were made in a government office. And the next day she pointed them out. And 2 days later, the officer calls her and sets her a separate appointment and says, "Madam, can you look at all the files and do this for us?" So it's about, can you make this a lot more easier for us and things like that. So yeah, I mean, and so many political parties, caste parties, from 1977 to 2021, when the ADMK was strong till 2021, 85% of votes go only to the DMK and the ADMK led alliances. So any small party can convert their votes into seats only with a DMK or an ADMK because of the broad basing of identity. And one of the big, cribbing that the leader of the PAMAK or the Toilers Party, which is otherwise a one-year based party, said that if only I was in UP, my father would have been chief minister. So, which is not the case in Tamil Nadu. There are hardly 10 seats, hardly 10% votes, hardly 10-15 seats. So votes to seats conversion continues to be, the fulcrum continues to exist with the Dravidian, which is now dipped in 2024 to 70. The electoral vote of the Dravidian movement, which is 85, dipped to 70. But that 70, in other words, is also, a few caste parties attracting towards BJP as against the ADMK. So now that the ADMK and BJP are an alliance again, we have to see how 2026 pans out. So yeah. And engagement with tribals and Adivasis, great question. So there is a good and a bad, and which is what I was told by a geographer. So the notion of empowerment is in a very education and then employment and then empowerment route. So hereditary occupations, or let's say conserving indigenous traditions, are pursued in parallel. So there are possibilities where one may take over the other. So it's not one or the other. They both are provided together. So how this would yield, and the Dravidian movement was very particular that the tribals are not just constituents of the identity but also markers of the identity, or makers of the identity. So in as early as 1921, Nadesa Mudaliar says non-Brahmin Dravidians mean non-Brahmin Hindus, Mohammedans, Anglo-Indian Christians, tribals, and all of that. So it's even in the conception, which is the case with Muslims or even the case with Christians. A lot of translation in Tamil was actually done by Christians. Tamil classical language status was basically negotiated, or the movement was led by a Muslim, a Tamil Muslim. So useful, yeah. Sorry, next.
If you have time, again.
Yeah, go on, please.
Shankar, yeah. There is actually this DMK became a completely on electoral mission. Actually, they are completely focusing on winning the election. That's like 67 onwards. Actually. So still, I'm not sure actually they are really serious about the ideology or anything like that. Or do you have people actually currently any seriously they are thinking about ideology, or like Periyar or Annadurai? Even from Karnanidhi, 67, they are very pragmatic. They are very practical, and they are only focusing on election, winning the election. That the two thing matters is like only one is caste and money. That is even candidate selection itself. That's what my understanding about. Because I'm an insider in Tamil Nadu.
Oh.
I'm from Trichy, the own city, sir. Okay, so they focus only to. Okay, that's the thing. Actually, are they serious about ideology, or are they serious, or do they have any people actually?
Sir, I will respond.
Yeah, thank you.
I just had a generalized question about from a research point of view. So you've obviously been, following the Dravidian movement and the DMK for so many years. I was just curious, like as a researcher, once you got into this particular research for your PhD and all that, what surprised you? Like, from everything that you knew and you had a context of probably decades. But when you go into this, something new comes and which startles you and you're like, oh, this changes, or I didn't know this at all. Like, I was just curious from that point of view.
My question is something to do with dynastic politics, the idea of dynasty politics. And I mean, that's a strong criticism that's been posed against the DMK. And but across India, there have been a lot of other parties also that use dynasty politics. And what gives them the validity and not DMK? And another question is to do with within all of this, in context. There's a new contestant like Vijay who's coming into into politics, and his ideology seems to be leading towards both Dravidianism as well as Tamil nationalism, and a lot more of elements as well. So I just want to know what's your take on that, and also in terms of populism, I feel that there has been a lot of populistic agenda and propaganda with the DMK for quite some time, but the recent kind of populism that's been existing within Tamil Nadu as well as in Kerala, there's been a lot of parallels and a lot of criticism over the kind of image construction and all of that, which is trying to kind of use a more of a nationalistic kind of a mode, if I may say. So, what is your take on that as well? Thank you.
I understand. The pragmatic versus ideology. If ideology is not practical, the first things first, the people that the party or the movement is trying to engage with do not have a lot of time to sit and reflect and then think about and theorize. They need to theorize and think and reflect as they also make the money for food, and as they make their livelihoods. So a lot of this question about subaltern movements, which also comes against Kanchiram, which is, there's a useful line that he says, yes, I'm an opportunist because I've not been given any opportunities. हाँ मैं अवसरवाद हूँ क्योंकि मुझे अवसर कभी मिले नहीं. So which is something that drives subaltern politics. And Dravidian movement is anything but pure. It's actually an anti-pure politics. It believes in mosaics as against marbles. It believes in rocking the difficult path of trying to bring 10 people together. And I'm reminded of what a political consultant, and I've been one myself. I still am, I think. So when the advice was given to the top leadership of the DMK in a small room, saying that, well, we will give narration of what needs to be posted on social media, just get the machinery working. The leaders said, no, you work a trend around what's being discussed, because there are multiple vocabularies within the Dravidian movement which will come out. And if you're able to weave a trend around it, that's great. At best, we can give them keywords, not what to post. So in this context, is it pragmatic? It is basically a politics of empowerment that is practical and viable. They are more interested in viable politics than, Puritanian politics. It's not puritanical at all. So, and in terms of caste and money, if the Indian society is split on caste and class, how will politics be done? For instance, if I am beaten to death because I am a scheduled caste, then I will use my identity as scheduled caste with a certificate, which is an administrative category, to get reservation system. So how does that become caste politics? So it's what are you using it for? I mean, this again brings me back to Ambedkar. Constitution is a tool. Whoever uses it matters. And if it goes into the hands of wrong people, I will burn it myself. So that's something that Ambedkar said. I mean, and I'm reminded of that. So and in terms of money, India spends as much as the US. 2020 elections, the US per voter expenditure is $64. 2024 India election results, if you were to go by Center for Media Studies, it's 1.35 lakh crore, which is $16. Purchasing power parity between the two countries is 1:4, which means you're 1/7 the size of an economy and still spend the same money. Do you think, you can walk the talk by, people from, extremely poor backgrounds? No way. The question is, are you in business to advance your political career, or are you in politics to advance your business career? So if you are in politics, if you are in business to advance your political career, then fair. Because since 1976, India is in a gray zone where corporate donations are banned. And as of today, even electoral bonds are banned. So how does political party raise money? So by that logic, your guess is as good as mine. Any money raised by political party is corrupt. But you need money. You need to fund elections. Elections are not free. I can't get more honest than this, sir. And what surprised you? Okay. So, in fact, this is what surprised me. That when, a progressive politics picked up by extremely marginalized caste people are called as opportunism. So therefore, my chapter is also called Navigating the Prism of Opportunism, towards achieving empowerment. Why did the DMK give up Dravidian Nadu if they were so interested in the ideology? No, because people need to live. If only people, and this is the same thing that Lalu Prasad Yadav said, yes, you're going after something, but if you're all dead, who will pray? And he's also one of the first leaders that gave menstrual leave for women who are working in factories. Not any progressive government that you can think of. In the 1990s, it was Lalu Prasad Yadav. But what do we remember him as? And in terms of dynastic politics, plot it on the graph, you will see all political parties doing it. So therefore, it's a narrative game. And in narratives, legitimacy comes from which part of the social spectrum you belong to. So, yes, every political party, when you plot it on the graph, I think Hindustan Times has also done a piece. I think Roshan Kishore and Nishant Kumar, very recently, they've put together the spread of dynasts. My question is, when, the legitimacy comes for a third generation doctor because there were two doctors in the family, it is plausible that it will also extend to the sphere of politics. Yes, it creates an entry barrier, no doubts. Am I against it? Yes. But is it how it works? Yes. So for instance, my interest would be with the emergence of, let's say, Udayanidhi Stalin. Now Tamil Nadu has the first Dalit education minister. Education was not allowed for Dalits, and now education ministry is held by Dalits. And now 200 of these young speakers are being brought up. And the same case was with Stalin when he took charge at the time, when he emerged in the party ranks. And none of these people come from, at least in the Dravidian parties, they don't come from parent bodies. They are always asked to fight from outside so that you make a place and legitimacy inside. So it's, in other words, if I can give you a simple example, it's like, you work in the last room of a departmental store and work your way to the cash counter. As again, start from the cash counter, which is something that also a Tamil person told me very interestingly. Populism, image creation. In terms of populism, if I were to borrow from Sri Krishna, populism is not such a bad thing. And you have to read his book, fantastic. And in fact, you read one of the chapters of his book, he presents populism in the most fuzzy manner as it exists in India. But you just look at a few graphs, you'll understand. So he reduces the job of a lot of people with just a few pages, which I in fact was telling him today, very grateful for that. Instead of making a clear 45-degree line saying good, bad, he said, no, it's all gray. And you read that book, you'll realize that populism is not such a bad thing, because you do not have an option but to engage in existing vocabularies to make your own vocabulary. So if you have a tall, white, dominant, handsome leader, the counter will also be on those metrics. To say that, no, dark-looking person are also handsome. But to say that, oh, why are you arguing on the notions of handsome? I don't know. I mean, because the repertoires are discussed or are created, the vocabulary of the elections are created on the ground. It is not something that you give top down. It would be very anti-democratic to say, oh, you should think what I am thinking. Instead, it's the flip side. Oh, what are you guys thinking? Let me engage with you in terms of what you're thinking. And image construction, I'm only willing to sort of say this. There is this, every state government in India has a cash transfer scheme, isn't it? That are given to women. In a few places, they're called Ladli Behna, Lakshmi Bhandar, Lakshmi. They all render women as Labhartis, as Yamini Iyer would argue, which is beneficiaries. But Tamil Nadu called it Urimai Togai, meaning rightful sum. Sum, right? Hak Rashi, which is rightful sum. Urimai is right, Togai is sum. So, and this came as a question. And as the consultants would argue at that time, there was also questions saying that, oh, why don't we make it as, a brother giving a sister money? And he said, no, that's dowry. He said this should not even be called an assistance scheme. And every stage, even 2 days back in his talk, he said, this is not your assistance scheme, this is your right. We are not here to give you assistance, we are only here to give you your rights or enable you exercise your rights. So by that logic, I think if image construction is around rights-based framework, it's useful, isn't it? Yeah, thanks.